Hello.
Hello.
It is October 22nd, 2017, and I am here with Robin Kirby, and we are going to talk about her experience at the Women's March.
Okay.
And so, where were you born? Let's just start with your background a little bit.
Okay. I was born in Gainesville, Georgia. But moved around a lot growing up because my dad was in the Army.
Okay.
So, don't really have a normal hometown situation or a typical hometown situation. But Gainesville's where I'm from as much as anywhere.
Okay. And how long have you lived in Atlanta or in the Atlanta area?
Well, I was about to say, now I feel like I guess really Decatur's where I'm from as much as anywhere because I've been here for almost 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what do you do?
I work for a nonprofit organization. I do fundraising. So I write grants and do special events and work with corporate partners and all that sort of stuff to raise funds.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. So, growing up in your family, what was their political leanings?
Conservative. Very conservative.
Okay. I had another question. So, before the Women's March, how would you describe your political participation in your lifetime before the Women's March?
Certainly I would say more activist or, active than average, certainly. It's not like I'm out there in marches every weekend or anything like that, but I had certainly ever participated in a march, obviously on a much smaller scale in my life, or rallies or that sort of thing.
What sort of marches and rallies did you go to?
Back in the day, like take back the night kind of things. I've shown up at a couple of Black Lives Matter things. So.
Wow. Interesting. Okay, so how would you describe your own political leanings? What political party do you support?
The Democratic Party, very liberal.
And were you a lifelong Democrat, or has...
Yeah, pretty much. When I went off to college and, of course, had come from my home, I would have identified as Republican just because, whatever. But that didn't really last very long. As soon as I kind of got out into the world at all, I was like, that's not what I think. So...
Okay. So, we'll jump right into it then. Why did you decide to march on January 21st?
I think like a lot of people, I was just absolutely dumbfounded with the results of the presidential election, that someone who had basically come right out and talked about assaulting women could be elected president. And that combined with his vice presidential candidate and, having control of the Congress and knowing that reproductive rights were almost certainly on the line, it just seemed like it was really important. As soon as we heard about that, my friend and I, which was days after the election, we were like, oh, that's it. We're going to go. So just felt like it was important to show up and be counted. And
well, that makes sense. So was there any specific issue that you felt was more important than others? Or,
reproductive rights is certainly very important. And I I just heard this morning on the news that it's not just the Supreme Court, which is, in peril, in my view, but they were commenting that with all the other, I guess, vacancies or potential appointments just in the federal court system in general, that, this goober has the potential to really reshape, the whole judicial system. And so it's a great concern to me, what may happen with reproductive freedoms.
And just to clarify, this goober, you mean the president? No, that's fine.
Yes, the president. I don't like to use his name.
I understand. I'm not going to make you say he who shall not be named. Pausing this. Okay. So we were talking about issues that were particularly important to you, and so when you were at the march, what other issues did you see represented there, and how did you feel about them?
Obviously sexual assault and that whole sort of thing. People were talking about, had signs about, blah, blah, blah. I think gay rights also prominently featured. Science, Black Lives Matter.
When you say blah, 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 you're talking specifically about the sexual assault issue, signs about that?
Yes, just the whole thing about the president's grotesqueness and, willingness to engage in, certainly inappropriate actions, but I would argue almost certainly illegal ones as well.
Right.
Towards women. So.
Well, how did you feel about the different issues you saw represented there?
I thought it was great for me, obviously, to just be there and to see so many people, and it's really hard to even describe what a crowd like that is like, or looks like, feels like. But to just see so many people who were willing to stand up and say, your values are not our values, and we're not going to accept it.
Okay. Well, so which march did you attend?
I was in Washington.
Oh, you went to Washington?
Yeah.
That's excellent. So what made you decide to go to Washington?
Well, again, when it first started, that's what it was. It obviously eventually grew into this movement that had marches simultaneously or on the same day taking place in a lot of other cities. But when it first started, that was the point, was to converge onto Washington on the inauguration weekend and turn out in what in fact were bigger numbers than those at the inauguration.
Right.
Despite what some people might try to say. So we decided, again, as soon as we heard about it, we decided, my friend and I, very early on, that we were going to go. So that was sort of our plan before even there were local alternatives or, options in other cities or whatever. But that's where it is. That's where he is. That's where the inauguration is. That's where the decisions are made. And, that I felt it was important to be there in my nation's capital.
So who all did you go with?
So my friend Janet and I went, and I took my daughter, Audrey. She was 12 at the time, and I felt it was important for her to see what was, surely going to be a once in a lifetime kind of a thing, and to feel sort of that sisterhood and to understand, what it means to stand up and be counted and to be a part of something like that. So we went. We stayed with a friend of ours from college who lives in Arlington, and she had, gosh, I'm going to say probably 6 or so other women, friends from college and so forth, who came and stayed as well. So it was a house full.
Wow. So how did you get to, so first off, how did you get to Washington, D.C.?
Janet and I drove.
Oh, wow. How long a drive is that?
Oh, gosh, I think it was around 11 hours or so. It seemed, it seemed surprisingly quick for, it didn't seem to take as long as it might have. I guess we were excited or whatever.
Yeah. And so where did you stay in Washington?
With my friend Katie.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so on the day of the march, how did you get to the march?
We took the train. So we drove to a nearby station and took the metro in. And we ended up actually, because of where we were, which was maybe there were like 2 stations farther out than the station where we were. But the trains were already full as they were coming in. So we got on the train the wrong direction and rode it out to the farthest stop out, so that we could turn around and come back. That was the only way we were going to get there. We were never going to get on a train that way. And then we subsequently turned my sign around, or my daughter's sign around maybe, and wrote that message on the back of it in a Sharpie to hold up to the window to tell other people, you gotta ride, get on the wrong way. You're never getting on a train. So people would see the sign and be like, oh, okay, yeah, thanks.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So you were trying just to help everybody else.
Yeah, well, the whole environment was very much that way. I mean, the environment was just so beautiful, of just people all supporting one another, and it's just a great energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's actually where I was going to go next, was the sort of atmosphere of the crowd. So what were you expecting from the march when you got there? I mean, what were you expecting to sort of get out of the experience?
Yeah, I don't know if I fully knew what to expect or had a set expectation, other than, as I've mentioned, to be a part of it, to show up, to make myself counted, and be a part of this movement. Saying we aren't okay with what y'all have in store for us, and we're not going to just sit down and take it, as it were. So I don't know that I had necessarily an expectation. Certainly I knew I had never participated in anything like that before, and who had, because it was kind of unprecedented. So, but to, like I say, just be on the train with those folks, and then once we arrived at the march, or at our stop and getting off the train, just getting into the on the platform, exiting the train, just the roar of people just cheering and being so excited to be there was really something. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy or cliche or whatever, but it really was sort of electric, like just amazing. And I never saw, in spite of nearly 1 million people there, or however many it was, any fighting or pushing or nastiness, or other than from like counter protesters, but like there was, everybody was just polite and, as I say, helpful, and everybody, it was just really beautiful.
So you did see you saw counter protesters?
Mm-hmm.
So would you describe that? Or
Yeah, on the parade route in particular, some small group of people had set up themselves in the middle of the road on the parade route with like loudspeakers and stuff like that to shout their hateful anti-gay, you're all going to hell kind of messages. And they got completely surrounded and circled with marchers, our kind, standing around them and shouting out, over them, love Trump's hate and that sort of thing, so that they were just completely drowned out, even though they had, loudspeakers and equipment and that sort of thing. Nobody there was having it.
So did you see any other counter protesters, or was
I'm sure we did. But as I say, nobody really paid them honestly too much attention unless it was to peacefully overcome them and, let them know that we weren't here for that.
Well, that's very cool. So, what were some of the signs that you saw?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I wish I could remember now the really good ones. I'm sure I have pictures. There were some great ones, but I will just say that my daughter drew one that was, and this was her idea. We had to help her come up with some of the names, but she drew a picture of Rosie the Riveter, and she wrote the word strong, and then each letter, she put like a woman's name. I recall the T, we gave her Tina Fey.
Oh, nice, nice.
But the G was Gloria Steinem, and there was, I can't remember, probably Oprah Winfrey. Anyway, so we had, we helped her, as I say, come up. I think Rosa Parks was the R,
Nice.
So we helped her come up with some of the names, but the concept was hers, and the drawing was great, and she got loads of compliments, and people took pictures with her and stuff like that of her sign. There was lots of that sort of thing, taking pictures with people and their signs, and
that's very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so were there any chants that you heard, or?
Oh yes, there was Love Trump's Hate, as I mentioned. Oh gosh. See, I should have given this thought, because I'm sure I could, if not on the spot, come up with them, but I don't remember now.
Okay.
I mean, loads of them, all about, from all kinds of things, whether it was keeping your hands to yourself or, not in our White House kind of things. Not my president, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
There were some clever ones, and I wish now that I could think what those were, because there were some clever ones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was 9 months ago, so.
Yeah.
So what about speakers at the march? Did you see any speakers, or?
Yes, not as many as we would have liked. So when we got there, it was already really full, and we were pretty far back from any of the jumbotrons or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we could still hear and sort of had a view of one of the jumbotrons. It was just so crowded you could hardly even move. If you found a spot, you just were sort of stuck there. And who did we hear? I'm trying to remember. We heard Gloria Steinem, so that's awesome. And there's somebody else that I'm forgetting that we heard. Obviously lots of the organizers and those kinds of things. And then our hostess had, inauguration day was the day before, and it was a hard day for us. There was lots of drinking, and there was lots of ice cream eating, and all sorts of consolation. And our hostess, Katie, had, she'd really have a lot to drink. And so the morning was hard for her. And so she had to have a Coke. And so we went in search of a Coke for her. And we didn't want to break up our group. And as I mentioned, we were probably almost around 10 of us trying to snake our way, through the crowds hand in hand. And we didn't really realize once we got out that we would never be able to get back in, because it only got more and more and more and more crowded after we had arrived. And so we did miss, a lot of the speakers because we had sort of lost our place right there. So obviously heard some of them, and then, listened to others of them online and that kind of thing. But
so, do you have any impressions, emotional impressions from the speeches, or do you?
For myself, it's really cool to see and hear Gloria Steinem because, she's just an amazing icon, obviously. I don't remember specifically too much of I don't think she said anything that would surprise anyone. So, there wasn't like there was something that jumped out and I said, wow, I never heard that before, or never, that just really stuck with me. But it was certainly very cool to, see a feminist icon like that. But no, not specifically in terms of what was said.
Okay. So you said there were about 10 of you in a group. Mm-hmm. And y'all stayed together for the whole march, or yeah. How did y'all manage that?
We had these little pink hats. It wasn't easy, but it was just keeping eyes on. And, one of the beautiful things for me about it was I was the only one that brought my child. I think some of the others considered it, and, there were concerns that, there could be danger, or, something could happen. And it's certainly something that I considered as well. And I even had talked to Audrey about it, and she thought about whether she wanted to go or not. But ultimately, we decided that we would not let those fears, keep us from participating, and we did indeed go. But it was great having that group of moms, to all sort of help keep up with her, and everybody, the whole group, all of us, was like, who has eyes on Audrey, Mm-hmm. So that was great. So I don't know, somehow we just managed to not get too far apart from one another. We know one another's signs or jackets or, whatever it was, and we would pause if we needed to, during the march or making our way through the crowds or whatever, to stop and account for everyone. Where's so-and-so, where's Missy, where's whoever, and, we managed to keep it together. We were proud of ourselves. So that's a rambly answer to your question to say, I'm not quite sure how we succeeded in that, but we certainly patted ourselves on the back at the end of the day that we managed to all stick together.
Definitely. I think that was a very good answer. So what about law enforcement? Did you see any law enforcement at the march?
We did, but not as much as you might imagine. I don't remember seeing, a really militarized looking presence or anything like that. You might think that for a crowd that size, and under the climate or whatever, that you might see more than we saw. But perhaps they just did a good job of receding, or there were so many people that I didn't didn't notice them as much, but we did see them. I particularly remember, again, coming off the train and working our way through the station or whatever it's called, working our way up to the street, the police there, giving high fives and, really cheering everybody on and really felt like they felt a part of it, which was cool.
That is cool. Well, that's very cool. So what were moments that really stood out for you?
I think, as I mentioned, getting off the train and hearing the roar and getting your first kind of glimpse of the numbers of people. Similarly, getting up to the street and seeing the numbers of people. You really just can't, I can't put into words, what a crowd of that size is. I'm certain it's the only time I've ever been anywhere near, that number of people. So, seeing just the sheer numbers and letting that first wash over is really something. As I mentioned, I think the kind of demeanor of people, everybody being friendly, everybody smiling and high-fiving and, appreciating one another's signs. And, you felt a lot of kind of warmth and love, really. So that was cool. Yeah, just sit down, like when you find a minute to take a break, get something to eat, whatever, just talking to the people around you, talking to the people on the train. Everybody's there for the same thing. And the camaraderie, was probably the biggest takeaway to me, especially coming out of the results of the election and feeling like, what is this country I live in?
Right.
I don't understand. So to be surrounded in such an enormous way by people who you knew did see things more the same way that you do.
Well, was there anything that really surprised you, or?
I don't know. I mean, other than, like I say, really just the magnitude. I think I don't know if I'd say surprised per se, but we did find it on some level remarkable that in that number of people, like we did not see one skirmish, not one instance of people even really bristling at one another, or, there just was no, certainly no violence, which, was, I think, a reasonable concern, but just not even any nastiness in the whole day. Just didn't see any hint of anything like that. It was all just goodness.
That's nice. So how about, what did you think about coverage of the march in the media?
I'm trying to recall, I feel like it was the day before, on the inauguration day, in contrast to what I was just saying, there were some outbreaks of, people, I don't know, breaking windows or that sort of thing. And I don't know whether it was at all portrayed this way or if this was just the conflation of things that people on another side are apt to create in their own minds. But I remember, my mom texting me and saying, oh, people are throwing bricks at police. That's really nice. As if it had anything to do with me and my people and why we were there.
Where were people throwing bricks at police? I
mean, I don't, who knows whether that actually even happened. Let's be clear. I don't know.
Okay.
But certainly there was some violence or what do you call it? Rioting or, that sort of thing on some scale. There was.
I did hear news reports on the day of the inauguration.
Yes, on that day. But I think because, and again, I'm not saying that the news portrayed it this way. I don't know. And I certainly don't watch Fox News. So who knows, what they might have said. But like I say, certainly my mother conflated the two that's what I got back, was that.
But coverage of the march that you yourself saw, what did you see?
I mean, I didn't see a lot of coverage because I was there. But one thing that did stick out with me in terms of coverage that I saw after the fact was the aerial shot that I saw, or else from top of a building or whatever, of the crowd. And, we, of course, had our view of the main part of the mall or whatever, where everybody was lined up and the stage was ahead and the jumbotrons were there. And that was sort of the sense of the throngs that we saw. But then once later we saw the shots from above, you realized all the other streets coming off from the other sides were filled as well. Like it was, we had the one main view, but they were also coming up from behind the stage and from the sides of the stage. The roads were just as filled with people. And to see the crowds from that angle, and to get that further sense of it was like, whoa. Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. So how would you describe your family's reaction to your going to the march? How did they?
Oh, they didn't understand it at all. I think my sister asked, why are you going? What are you marching for? What's, like they just literally a complete disconnect of why would you do that? But it was interesting. A friend of the family, my mom and dad's oldest couple friends, who, of course, I've known my whole life, Kay, her friend, was there. And I thought that was cool. My mom, that was another message that I received while I was there was, this is Kay's number, blah, 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 because I'm going to totally find her.
Well,
Although Kay is over 6 feet tall, so if I was going to find a woman in the crowd, she'd be the one. But
could run into each other.
I think I texted her something like that, Kay, like, I expect you'll be literally and figuratively above the crowd, as I would expect no less,
So what was your feeling the day after the march?
Again, still just sort of riding on the high of having been in that group of women standing up, being counted. It was a hopeful then. I think it's hard to hold on to that. We've had some conversations recently, friends and I have had, recalling that feeling of okay, this is going to be okay. And then, as the months have gone on, sometimes there are moments where it has been difficult to, I think, hold on to that sense of hopefulness. But that next day was hopeful in the sense that, we just felt like we had this momentum and this sense that we could make a difference. And I think certainly to some extent that's been true. I think, I don't know, I think probably things could have been worse. Things have been held off to some extent.
So how would you describe your political participation since the march?
Like a lot of people, I think I was really gung ho, early on. Went to my local Democrat meeting where there were tons of people, probably more than had ever been there before. But it was kind of a disorganized mess. And so my friends and I who went were like, ooh, I don't know. I don't know that I have the fortitude for that. Although my neighbor here, I'd seen him that evening and he mentioned it again. So I may try to, get back involved. I have all of my representatives in my phone stored, and I call with some regularity about some piece of legislation or another that I want to weigh in on. I'm sure I'm on some list or something. Oh, her again. But that's okay. I recently was at the beach with my mom and my sister, and sitting, in our chairs on the beach, I made a couple of calls to my senators about health care legislation, and my mom and sister looked at me like I had sprouted another head, and my sister was like, is she really doing this? I'm like, yes, I am really doing this. You could do it too. If you cared about taking people's health care away as much as I care about not, you certainly could weigh in on that if you wanted to.
Well, that was a good. I see what you're saying. So, looking to the future, what do you? Well, maybe before the future, I'll ask, what do you do to? How do you cope with living in this time? I mean, do you even feel?
It is hard not to be discouraged, really. Again, I heard that thing on the news this morning about the courts, and I was like, stop talking. I can't hear that. I said from the very beginning, and I still sort of stand by this, essentially, that I don't think that the president will serve out his full term, one way or another. Honestly, I don't think he ever really wanted the job. I think he entered in the whole thing to raise his own brand and, that sort of thing. I don't think that he thought he would win or wanted the job. And I'm not sure that he has the fortitude to stick it out. If I'm wrong about that, I think it is also within reason to think that, he may be impeached for something or another. And the thing about that is that the guy that's coming behind him is also terrifying. I don't think he's as likely to tweet us into a nuclear winter, but his politics are, probably even worse, in some respects. And so that's also terrifying. So it really, the outlook is grim from my view. I'm hopeful that people can get off their butts and turn out and vote, and hopefully we can have an impact in the midterms. I would feel a lot better with one of those nut jobs in the White House if we, had some control over an other branch of the government.
So what is it that you fear?
I think, there's so much that it's hard to even, how do you pick one thing? I think women's reproductive rights are almost certain to be challenged with Republican control over everything. Gay rights, gay marriage. I think, there's even with some bipartisanship, if even if we had some kind of balance in the representation, it would be very unlikely that anything would be done about reasonable gun control. But certainly with Republicans in control, there's no chance of anything along those lines being addressed. And I think that we're in a horrible, horrible state where that's concerned. I think it's entirely possible that we may find ourselves embroiled in who knows how many military engagements. What's not to worry about?
So, are there any, if someone were to ask you how to cope, what would you, what strategies would you suggest to somebody about how to live, cope in the, I guess we could call it the Trump era?
Yeah, it's tough. I try to stay as informed as I can. That's a mixed bag, obviously, because it's a 5-alarm fire all the time. But, and I'm not even a particularly anxious person. In the grand scheme of things, I don't really suffer from anxiety or that sort of thing. I have friends who, live a lot more on the emotional or whatever edge than I do. But so I don't know, I can see that it would be more difficult, for some people, depending on your predisposition or whatever, than it even is for me. But I do find it anxiety producing, and that's not even my natural kind of, like I say, disposition. But I do try to stay informed. That is a mixed bag. I have unfollowed a lot of people on social media. I'm from Gainesville, Georgia. It's, everybody I went to high school with, but virtually everyone I went to high school with is, not just conservative, but outspokenly kind of rabidly conservative. So I have to disengage from a lot of that chatter because there are people who just will not see any reason and will not concede any ground, can't recognize any misstep that the president makes. They just blindly defend no matter what. And, there's no point in engaging with that. So I do sort of disengage from some of that. And to that end, I also have a private Facebook group of people who are like-minded, where we can go and kind of seek refuge from Facebook Gen Pop, as we call it, and, vent and seek counsel when we need to. So I guess however it is, whether it's real life friendships, which I also do this in, or social media and that sort of thing, to kind of find some like-minded folks. It's almost like a support group or something, I guess. So.
Well, I think we've come to the end here. So the last thing I'm going to ask is if there's anything you want to talk about, anything you want to mention that you don't feel has been addressed or covered.
I don't know. not really. I think, I referenced like the pink hats earlier, joked about that. And, I can recall some conversations or, my sister turned up her nose at the idea of the pussy hat. And, I know my friend Janet, got into it like with her dad on a number of occasions about this sort of thing. I find it interesting that people are so willing to criticize the women for getting out and talking about these things, or maybe they had a sign with what they would consider some sort of vulgar language, or, they don't like the pussy hat and that's vulgar. And again, my sister, had some stuff to say about that. And I thought, but y'all voted for this man. Y'all voted for this guy who said, grab him by the pussy. And I just don't understand, how you can throw your support behind that and at the same time criticize women for pointing out that it's not, that that's not okay. We're using his words and his language to talk about how this is not acceptable. But then you're grossed out by us. I don't get it. So I don't know. I don't know why that occurred to me, but it did. So that's a frustrating thing. People are really hypocritical.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Well, unless there's anything else, we're done. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this experience.
No problem.
All right.